They want your savings. They want your energy. They want your identity. And if Brussels has its way, they'll take all three. Europe isn't just in trouble. It's collapsing. Not metaphorically, not someday, but now. Germany's industries are shutting down. France is rioting. Sweden's cities are fracturing. And behind it all, the quiet construction of a control regime designed to strip the average citizen of wealth, privacy, and power, all in the name of unity. But this isn't chaos, it's coordination. And as you'll see in this video, the terrifying part isn't what's broken, it's what's being built in its place. You've heard about Europe's problems even on the most mainstream of news broadcasts: stagnation, upheaval, terrorist attacks on repeat. But what if all this chaos, mass migration, and a high cost of living was a feature, not a bug? You can go back to the migrant crisis of 2015 or to the debt crisis a few years earlier. Whatever the problem, the EU's solution for it has always been the same. No reform, just more control and less accountability. It's built into the system. The EU's institutions are shockingly undemocratic. Sure, the European Parliament gets elected every 5 years, but it has little real power, so the turnout is low. When you say the word parliament, you usually think of a legislative body, but that's not the case here. The European Parliament can't actually propose legislation. That has to come from the European Commission, which gets its president from the European Council. The Council is made up of the heads of state or government of the EU's member states, plus 2 non-voting members, the Commission President and the Council President. Once the European Commission has a president, other commissioners get appointed. The Parliament only gets to vote the European commissioners up or down, and not even individually, but as a single block. Are you following along? Gets even bleaker. Once they're in, the European commissioners get to propose most of the rules and regulations that are put into place around the Union. Meanwhile, the elected parliament only has the power to reject the rules. And hey, the EU has a reputation. If something gets rejected, it just waits until it gets the right outcome eventually. In other words, it's the perfect organization to not let a crisis go to waste. Little wonder why growing numbers of Europeans now believe the EU isn't just mismanaging the continent. It's deliberate. Just look at the latest proposal from the bureaucrats. Imagine you go to the bank on an ordinary day only to find it's not so ordinary. You see something new and alarming. It's the latest scheme from the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. Like all Orwellian schemes, it has a name that doesn't raise any red flags. The Savings and Investment Union, SIU, launched in March 2025. The goal? Encourage people to invest their money instead of letting it sit in idle bank accounts. The bureaucrats loved it because between 750 to 800 billion euros a year could be unlocked in this way. But the devil is in the details. You don't do those investments yourself. The bureaucrats invest it for you. After all, if you actually want to grow your money, you might wind up investing it in the United States for better opportunities. Just wait, you'll see the chart soon enough. But for now, moving money out of Europe means the bureaucrats in Brussels don't get enough tax revenue for the things important to them. Since this is the European Union, you probably know what that means. More green energy boondoggles, perks for illegal immigrants, stuff managed by groups like BlackRock, and they take no responsibility for any money losses. It's a good way to avoid lawsuits. Naturally, the name probably won't be able to keep this stuff secret for too long. So the bureaucrats have structured it using a classic tactic of every streaming service, AI scraper, gym, and subscription box company: auto-enrollment and auto-renewal. It's not a scheme that can probably last too long under ordinary circumstances, but this is not a Netflix subscription. You can't just click to cancel. Those subscription services can't issue their own money. The people in Brussels can. So welcome to the second head of the Hydra, the digital euro, the European Central Bank's digital currency. Europe's technocrats say it's modern, convenient. Augustin Carstens, who was the GM of the Bank for International Settlements until this past June, said it differently. A central bank digital currency would give the authorities absolute control of transactions. Imagine a digital wallet tied to your identity, not only tracking every transaction you make, but even limiting what you can do. Why? You got flagged. Your carbon footprint was too big for this week. Cash probably seemed a lot more convenient. It wasn't so easy for Brussels to hit the pause button on your bank account. Now that you're flagged, there's no way to cancel your auto-renew with the SIU, is there? Little wonder why critics call the digital euro a Trojan horse for financial surveillance. It's not up and running yet, but the European Central Bank is excited. It successfully completed its 2-year preparation phase in October 2025. The plan now is to test the pilot version in the summer of 2027, if it can get the necessary bill in 2026. Why the rush? Because it's not the first time. This is a classic sign of a regime that knows it's lost public legitimacy and is doing everything it can to crack down before the fires of rebellion get too big to contain. But before we pull out our fire gear, please consider subscribing. It helps us keep telling you these stories that definitely won't come out on the European Union's press releases. There was another reason Britons took the unprecedented step of voting to leave the European Union in 2016. You know it, your neighbors know it. The only ones that don't seem to are the bureaucrats in Brussels. It's immigration. Over 1 million people showed up uninvited on Europe's doorstep not even a year before. And Brussels? It sort of looked like Denethor in Lord of the Rings, confused, powerless, and scheming not against the threat, but against dissent within the walls. And the problem didn't end that year. It keeps bubbling up. June 27, 2023. French police shot and killed 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk in Nanterre. At first, this was a story of police brutality and racial profiling. Prosecutors said it was an unjustifiable use of force under French law, but that didn't just end there. Arson, looting, and clashes with police broke out from the English Channel to the Mediterranean over the next week. 3,300 people were arrested. Over 1,000 buildings were damaged. Property damage rose to 650 million euros. It was the most serious rioting France had seen since the summer of 2005. So now the story was once again about immigration and Europe's failure to integrate the new arrivals. The response was predictable. France's National Front Party won an election for the European Parliament. Then President Macron dissolved the French Parliament to prevent the far right from coming to power. We'll come back to this. First, we have to go elsewhere because it's the same story. Unless you're one of the youngest members of Gen Z, you remember the huge wave of irregular migrants 10 years ago. Over 1 million came to Germany alone, and the infrastructure wasn't prepared. Women were assaulted en masse in Cologne only a few months later. That was the start of a trend. 163 German men per 100,000 were involved in violent crimes like assaults and armed robberies in 2024. 443 Ukrainians were. 538 Turks were. Now the big jump. For Iraqis, the number was 1,606. Afghans, 1,722. Syrians, 1,740. Moroccans, 1,885. Germany's police force? Not much help. When women complained about being threatened in public, the police told them to ask passengers for help and find a seat near the driver. In Sweden, same thing. It has become the gang violence capital of Europe, and 63% of rape convictions there involve men with a foreign background. For years, the EU's open border and asylum rules have prevented governments from acting against this threat. It's a high price to pay if the European Union works as intended, and that means it's back to the economy. The economy was always supposed to be the driving force of European integration. Sure, you might have unusual people coming in, but you'd get rich. That's the implied bargain. So, how's it paying off? Historically, the US and EU economies were largely equal in size, but one bounced back from the Great Recession much better than the other. Since then, America's pulled away and now the gap in economic size is yawning. $29.8 trillion to $19.4 trillion in 2024. Little wonder why bureaucrats in Brussels are so desperate to keep people from moving their money out. Just consider this other stat. Of the world's 50 biggest technology companies, only 4 are in Europe. An aging population that doesn't get tech? Maybe, but the real reason is that most of Europe is dead set on committing economic sabotage on itself. It always starts with Germany. Yes, that means it's time to reveal how a green utopia turned into an industrial nightmare. Like most bad policies, it came in phases. On March 11, 2011, Japan got hit by a 9.1 mega earthquake, and that was just the one in the combo. The second was the huge tsunami that struck the coast in just a half hour. The Fukushima nuclear plant got hit, and all 3 of its reactor cores melted down in the next 3 days. It was nowhere near Chernobyl, but it was the worst nuclear accident since. It was one of the worst things to ever happen, to Germany post-World Wars anyway. Then Chancellor Angela Merkel was watching closely and decided to get rid of the 17 nuclear reactors in Germany. They were always unpopular there anyway, so why not? There were just a couple of problems. First, those 17 operational reactors supplied 25% of Germany's electricity. No matter, 8 were shut down right away. The others were supposed to close by the end of 2022. 2022. That's an appropriate year to bring us to the problem behind door number 2. Germany talked about going green to make up the gap. Renewables, solar and wind. But no country has ever been able to get its electricity needs from solar and wind. Even wind-mighty Denmark has to rely on imports from its oil-rich neighbors. In fact, if current trends continue, we're at least a century away from eliminating the use of fossil fuels in the power grid. So Germany wasn't going to be an exception then or now. It needed a backup plan. Guess where it found it? It wasn't like Germany didn't get a warning. A rational country would have reconsidered after Putin sent his little green men into Crimea. It was a strong hint that maybe wannabe czars eager for territory don't make for the best business partners. But the partnership continued. So by 2021, Germany got 32% of its natural gas from Russia, plus 34% of its crude oil and 53% of the hard coal. If you're wondering how Putin built up his war chest, wonder no more. And yet, Germany astonishingly continued to phase out its nuclear energy, even with the bombs falling on Ukraine. The last reactors were shut down at the end of 2023. The result was predictable, except maybe if you're a bureaucrat in Brussels or Berlin. Germany now has the highest electricity prices in Europe. 0.3835 euros per kilowatt hour in the first half of 2025. That was 34% above the EU average. The ultimate insult? If Germany had just kept its last reactors on after Putin decided he wanted to cosplay as Stalin, electricity prices in 2024 would have been 23% lower than they were. Higher energy prices don't only mean misery for the average citizen. They also mean national industry becomes less competitive. Factories had to cut output because power was too expensive. The price of goods got higher. Some jobs had to be shipped elsewhere. So guess what? Germany's economy actually shrank by 0.3% in 2023 and 0.2% in 2024. The U.S. economy grew by 2.9% and 2.8%. And Germany is hardly alone. Industrial electricity prices in the EU were 2.5 times higher than in the United States in 2024, and wholesale gas prices were 5 times higher. The people around Europe are at their wits' end, though, and that's what really terrifies the bureaucrats. They might be desperate for the European project to succeed, even at the cost of certain liberties. But people around Europe don't have that same desperation. Europe's cultures were there long before anyone got the idea for a garbled United States of Europe. And now, those people are pushing back against the EU's undemocratic control mechanisms. There's probably no European leader that's more controversial than Hungary's longtime Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He's promoted closer ties with Russia, China, and Turkey. He once even called Hungary an illiberal democracy. But the EU got most upset about the border fences he built in 2015 to keep the migrant wave out of Hungary. And Hungary wasn't the only one. The bureaucrats in Brussels decided that every EU member state should take a certain quota of the newcomers from the Middle East and North Africa. Poland refused to accept any. It has a couple of reasons to say no. It borders Belarus, Putin's puppet state, and views any migrants coming from there as a form of hybrid warfare to destabilize Polish society. Poland went to great lengths to keep any migrants coming from Belarus out, including by using water cannons. But there's another reason. Poland said it would refuse to accept them from the rest of Europe because they were economic migrants. Public opinion on this is so strong that it even survived the change of government. The ruling Law and Justice Party that created the policy fell from power in the 2023 parliamentary election. It was replaced by a Donald, not that one, Donald Tusk, a former president of the European Council. But he was no Europhile. He reaffirmed the Law and Justice Party's refugee policy. He even went a step further. Last March, he announced that Poland would no longer comply with EU rules on asylum seekers. Period. The EU has put all kinds of pressure on Poland to accept them. The Court of Justice of the European Union ordered Poland to pay a fine of 320,200,000 euros for refusing to comply with the asylum rules. But Poland's not budging, and it's sending a message. The EU's undemocratic rules don't have to be absolute. Welcome to the rising tide of Eurosceptics on the continent. In 2022, the Italians went to the polls and elected Giorgia Meloni. In the past, she said that Italy would leave the euro, or even pull a Britain and leave the EU outright because it was rotten to the core. She's backed off that as prime minister, but has come up with a new way of dealing with people coming to Italy's shores. Send them to Albania. The Italian courts have blocked her more than once. She says she's going to find a way to make it work anyway. In 2026, she expects the centers to operate as she intended. And you'll never guess who's showing some interest. It's the Germans. Then Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said that she was watching closely. It's just as well because Germany's government, the so-called Traffic Light Coalition, collapsed in November 2024. Chancellor Olaf Scholz was out of power, so there was a snap election last February. The problem? It was a hung parliament, with the right-wing populist Alternative for Germany coming in second with almost 21% of the vote, ahead of the former chancellor's Social Democrats. It was the AfD's best result ever, double what it got less than 4 years earlier. Germany's politics were so chaotic that it wasn't until May that Friedrich Merz of the Christian Democratic Union was formally chosen as chancellor, and even he needed an unprecedented second round of voting in the Bundestag because he fell 6 votes short of a majority. His coalition partner? The Social Democratic Party, the CDU's traditional opposition. It's a pretty big display of how far European politics have shifted. A coalition like this doesn't have a good chance of getting anything done. France? Same thing. Multiple governments have collapsed in just the past 2 years because of the rise of the National Rally Party. Unstable minority governments continue to rule the country, and it's all to keep the National Rally out of power. But Sweden might be the biggest surprise of all. The Sweden Democrats have now gotten so powerful that they've actually entered a coalition agreement with Ulf Kristersson's moderate party. The EU's leaders scream bloody murder. Sweden, meanwhile, began to turn half a century of immigration policy on its head. Multiculturalism had failed. Integration had failed. More people are now leaving Sweden than coming in for the first time in decades. The Sweden Democrats are a bit like Meloni. They don't want to leave the EU anymore, but want to mandate that the people actually get to vote on EU treaties and revise its membership in the Schengen Agreement that caused so much chaos in 2015. So the European Union and its traditional ruling parties are scrambling. They don't look like proper governing elites. They look like they're clinging on to power as the continent crumbles around them in the face of issues they refuse to solve. Europe's future is no longer a question of evolution, but survival. The only questions left are, will Europe's elites get around to actually solving the continent's problems? Or will they try anything to cling on to power and eventually fail anyway?